Welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm Andy McGrath, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Christopher Turner. Chris is a documentary filmmaker who's been working in and around the alternative media for 10 years. He's met and interviewed many of the most recognized researchers in the alternative field, including David Icke, James Bartley, Simon Parkes, Mary Rodwell and Paul Sinclair. He's currently a member of the British Bigfoot Research Group, director of Don't Mention the Reptilians, Elusive The Bempton Phenomenon. He's currently working on a number of new documentary films. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very good, mate. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little bit knackered. As I said before we went live, you're my 18th interview in a row out of 20. But it's been good fun and also good to get to know, the researchers and what they think, what they believe about this whole genre. Now, in all cases, a paranormal obsession, just to get us started. Nobody ever starts off their career intending to plough the lucrative field of monster movies today. So what was it that dragged you away from the financially secure mainstream and into the barren waste of alternative media?
As with most people that get into this field with no prior experience, it was just happened by chance. I just happened to be friends with a guy that was into this paranormal, supernatural ufology. Really, that was his interest, and it's kind of infectious. I think once you dip your toe into this, if you're that way inclined, you can soon get overwhelmed by it, and you do. That's exactly what happens. I speak to, as you know, I've met and interviewed many people in the last 10, 11 years, and generally, if you're not an experiencer or you're not a witness, a lot of that, this sort of infectious sort of desire really to get to the bottom of the truth. I think I've always asked that question, Andy. I've always wondered, what is it about people like me that drives us to want to know at all, and sometimes at all costs? I mean, for the last, as you mentioned, being the lucrative.
It was in parentheses. Yeah.
Sort of the tongue in your cheek there.
Yeah.
It was really, and always has been, really about getting to the truth. I think one of them people that I just want to know. And I think even though there's quite a large part of me that knows that the likelihood of that being, ever being resolved and us ever knowing anything, getting any nearer to the truth, is very unlikely. However, it doesn't stop us. So I think what really made me delve deeper into this wasn't just an interest in it. As you might know, I had a job working on, I was a compositor, a visual effects artist, and I worked in a lot of mainstream TV and a lot of quite exciting shows, really. And I thought that was really what I wanted to do, but it was dragging me away from the subject, because I'd been involved in I'm in below budget filmmaking now, but before that I was in absolutely no budget filmmaking territory at that time. And I was missing it. I really missed, meeting the people, going to conferences. I guess just meeting interesting people, because being in the world of visual effects and, you're meeting producers, and the glamour soon wears off. It really doesn't take long before that spell just fades away as you're spending more and more time away from your family. And, whilst it's it can be an exciting job and an interesting job, it just wasn't for me. So I quit promptly, actually. I was missing my family, and I just said, no, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And I went straight back into part-time work, and I went back into just investigating strange phenomena, for the most part in ufology circles. That's really where I started this journey.
Now, there's one aspect of that, actually. I think that impacts upon one of the films of yours I thought was very interesting, which was it's got a strange title, Don't Mention the Reptilians. So for people out there who don't know what a reptilian is, what is a reptilian, and why shouldn't we mention them?
Well, I guess that title was a bit tongue-in-cheek, and it was, as I found very recently, the cryptid research is also another niche market, and the title was coined from David Icke. That was one of his phrases, and it was a guy called Alex Collier that said something very similar. So I just you know, people in the know, so to speak, of that subject knew what I was getting at. But also the reptilian subject, it was strange in the UFO community and ufology. It seemed to me that the typical grey alien that we're familiar with, that, you know, through the modern culture, is readily accepted as, as yeah, there's a possibility they exist, and if they do exist, that's pretty much what we expect them to look like. But you drop anything different, and you'll probably know this yourself from Sasquatch research. If you drop the Sasquatch into a UFO conversation, because they are not grey, 3 foot tall, and with black eyes, they're not alien. And that was very similar for the reptilian thing. It was just dismissed, and I guess, obviously, Andy, I'm a glutton for punishment, because from the reptilian subject, and I went on to try and prove the existence of Bigfoot in the UK. So both tasks were quite difficult. However, they were both very similar in the fact that in the UK and in Europe particularly, the surface had barely been scratched about that type of phenomenon.
Yeah.
So that's really how I got into the reptilian stuff. And then before that, I had been introduced to David Icke, some of his, not necessarily the more conspiratorial research that he'd been doing, because although he's got a big following and that was his sort of, the BBC made it known that that's what he would, you know, he's known for reptilians and nothing else. No one really wants to talk about any of the other consciousness research that he does. That the sort of reptilian thing came second, actually, to the consciousness research. So with ufology being an interest of mine, you know, right from being pretty young, and I'm not one of those guys that's ever had some sort of amazing experience. I've no abduction experiences or contact experiences, which is what I get asked a lot. I've had one or two unusual occurrences, but nothing that, you know, I would say is, you know, definitely ET related, potentially supernatural, just different. Certainly falls into the category of the woo. Let's say that.
Okay, that's quite interesting, actually. Talking about interviewing David Icke, quite interested in that. You say he's spoken about this reptilian subject for many years, and also other forms of consciousness and worldwide conspiracies and things like that. And I'm only barely familiar with his stuff. I've listened to some. How do you logically reconcile such strange claims of reality, like the ones he makes, to everyday life? And did you find yourself being convinced or affected by his claims when you were interviewing him?
I think what David Icke does, and other researchers like David, simply ask you to sort of just expand your horizons, just sort of look outside the box. And even within this subject, I did an interview recently where I was talking about people putting things in boxes for no good reason. I guess we could tie this into any of the phenomena that both you and I look into, anything supernatural or paranormal. There's this tendency, there's probably 7 or 8 boxes that these things are all put into, and they're securely, you know, fenced off from one another. They should never mix these things. Ironically, they tend to share a lot of the same. What I would say, perhaps the word I'm looking for, is that they seem to use the same mechanisms, if that makes sense. Yeah. Let's take cameras randomly as an example. You want to take a picture of a UFO. You take a camera out. It's not going to happen. You put the camera away. Out comes the UFO. You can say absolutely the same about Sasquatch. You go out there with a camera, you're just not going to see one. You put the camera away, out they come. And then does that go for the fairies? I think it goes for all the phenomena that fall into these categories. We can say that about them. It's sort of like they're so evasive, and at times you do feel like you're being played with. It's almost like the phenomena is observing and sort of monitoring us. You know, we're out there doing our best to sort of find any evidence, any proof of their existence, and all the while it just feels like we're just being observed. and the minute that we try and capture any data, whether that be audibly or video or any of the things that the Sasquatch researchers or ufologists try, we get little bits. We always seem to just get a little bit just to whet our appetites. But it's it's never nothing. That's what I've found, particularly in the last 3 years. You never get absolutely nothing. There's always just a little bit of something. And of course, a lot of this is hearsay. But I think with the David Icke stuff and those guys that looking into consciousness and just asking people to just be more aware, I just recognized that when I was looking around, even amongst my friends and family, that they were very close-minded, and ironically didn't seem to think that they were. And it was only when that you were introducing them to these sort of subjects and different and new concepts, even concepts widely discussed and theorized by mainstream science, that they were really uncomfortable about it. And I guess you might say that the reptilian and the Bigfoot stuff, it's a very taboo subject. Very taboo. People get really uncomfortable really quickly, I found. And that, as a filmmaker, of course, that's great, because you can get gold with that sort of stuff. Or not.
Sure. And I'm assuming, some of the witnesses you interviewed about reptilian encounters, what kind of feeling did you get from them? I mean, as a filmmaker who's interviewed now, probably hundreds of people over the years, you probably got a really good key into when somebody is telling you the truth, or and when somebody is hoaxing, or when somebody believes something that actually isn't real, but somehow, for whatever mental state that they find themselves in, this imagined experience has taken place. So how do you differentiate between these two people? People that perhaps need a little extra help, people who are hoaxing you, and people who've really, really seen something. What are the markers in their testimonies that stand out to you?
That's very difficult. This is a very difficult one. I think there's a lot of gut feeling there. Probably experience comes into it at first, because when I got into this initially, right at the very beginning, you tend to take people on the word. I think in the end, that's all we have for the most part, particularly in these circles. There are elements that I particularly look for. I mean, a lot of the deeper research delves into sort of bloodlines, particularly with abductions and UFO contact. It's often runs in families, and there are certain genetic markers, sometimes blood types, that kind of thing. But there was one particular case really that I've discussed actually recently, where I was contacted whilst I was making the reptilian film. A girl from America contacted me, and she was I think she was 30 years old at the time. And she sent me a very unusual image of some sort of entity. And what had happened is, she and the children had been having abduction type experiences. She'd been having them since childhood. Her sister had had them since childhood, and it had continued down the bloodline, down the generations. And they'd been telling the father, she'd been telling her husband all about this stuff, and he just really, really did not want to know. He genuinely believed that they were making it up, because that's what this phenomena does. It's sort of, again, it's that observation. They seem to observe and know exactly, almost playing mind games, and that is mind games is a large part of the abduction phenomena, actually. Sorry, excuse me.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'll start that again. So you can cut that, can't you?
No, I'm not cutting anything, but I'm just running. But it's okay. A bit of coughing is fine. I want the people listening to us to know that we get froggy throats and everything.
No worries.
Average general people, I can splice and dice. But with that thing you were saying there about the mind games being a big important part of it, there was that theory about in this reptilian world about them feeding on fear. Is that right? Something about feeding on fear, and sort of ties into all sort of ritualistic and satanic groups and things like that too. What's the crossover there?
Well, I'll just finish that story because that sort of leads into it. So essentially, what happened is this her husband worked on the oil rigs in 3-month stints, so he was away at sea for 3 months at a time, and probably once every couple of weeks she would record a video on the phone and send it to him. Because this is a few years ago, this is quite a while before sort of like the internet had evolved into what it is now. And upon receiving this video, all he could see behind her, he could see this entity in the screen behind her. And he's watched the video, rang home immediately to check on the children, and she knew automatically because he never phoned home. So when he phoned home and said, "I'm coming home," sort of like as soon as I can get home, she knew there was something wrong. Anyway, he arrived home and he showed her what she'd filmed. Unknowingly, she hadn't seen it. So at this point, she was sort of relieved. Her and the children were actually relieved at this time, because they thought that this was it. They would have his support. But he actually went the other way. He actually went deeper into denial upon seeing this. And it just goes to show that this phenomena, sometimes I think I forget how normal it is to me. And I forget what a taboo subject it is to most people. So for him to have that experience and react in that way, I mean, it must have been very frightening for him as well. And that this sort of case is ongoing. I still get emails from this lady now, updates about how things are happening. And these events are still happening. And there's a lot of psychological, as you said, this sort of the reptilian subject. I guess what I have learned in the last few years is that it's nobody's real. I mean, a lot of David Icke's research, people call it fear-based. It's sort of David's and people like James Bartley, for example, who look into the darker subjects, satanic cults, this sort of reptilian research, the jinn, dark magic, that sort of stuff. Whenever anyone starts to expose that sort of stuff, they get accused of being, a fearmonger. Whereas, of course, all they're trying to do is just inform people. What David had delved into and tied together, that a lot of again, going back to the similarities that that phenomena shares, and as you said, this sort of feeding on negative energy and inducing fear seems to be part. There's the old well-known one, the succubus in paranormal circles that would sit on the chest of the victim and sort of drain energy from them. The sleep paralysis as well. You can tie all that into it. And again, I think that's, of course, sleep paralysis. That's a huge debating point in this field. But overall, essentially, I think when you look at David Icke's research and you are looking and you tie in certain symbolism and you tie in certain groups and certain markers that we probably can't talk about, it's probably a little bit too dark, but it's evident in ufology that a lot of this is very relevant, and there's cross correlation there for sure. But that was kind of one of the reasons that I got out of reptilian research, actually, because there was this sort of hunger for sensationalism around it. They wanted, they sort of wanted it to be sensationalism. They wanted it all to be fear and darkness. And whilst a lot of it is, there are benevolent ET races out there. I mean, I'm certainly on board with I've been in these circles 10, 11 years. It's, for me, I don't really think it's something that we really debate anymore in ufology. ET abductions and ET contact cases are not really debated within the field that much anymore. Years ago it would be lights in the sky and nuts and bolts craft, and things have kind of moved on, and I think the research has sort of evolved, and there are a lot of again, I guess, correlations with the supernatural side of cryptid research, I guess I would say, which is sort of, I don't know whether that's given me a slight bias. I mean, I have talked about that before with you, I think. That we all come into these subjects with a bias regardless. Even though as a filmmaker you're trying to, depending on what angle you're taking, a lot of the time you're trying to stay neutral, you're trying to stay in the middle. But sometimes that's very difficult to be on the fence. And at times it just feels unnatural. So I just sort of let my projects, I just pretty much go where the research takes me. And I did that with the Reptilian film, and the Reptilian film ended up, there's a sequel to that coming, just because I found, very much like the cryptid research, that you can't cover this subject in 90 minutes. It's just, you can't actually scratch the surface, and you know that. Guys have been in these fields that I work with for 35, 40 years. And I know you interview a lot of guys in the cryptid research that have got the same experience. And probably a lot of them will tell you what I'm saying is that from a personal perspective, you grow as a researcher and you learn and you become less naive. But in terms of evidence, hard evidence, that just, it just isn't there, really. I mean,
they're mysteries for a reason, right? We haven't discovered these creatures. Let's talk about, let's say it's Bigfoot or whatever. We haven't discovered them because they're hard to discover. And it's not a proof that they're there. But the concept of them not being found ties in really well with their elusiveness, right? And I think that's why I really enjoyed the name you chose for that documentary about the British Bigfoot. I just thought that was very interesting. I do want to talk about elusive, actually, but one thing I wanted to ask you about the conspiracy theories and the secret societies and, people that listen to that kind of stuff a lot and get too emotionally invested in those end of the world type theories.
Yeah.
Do you think they end up feeling a bit hopeless and helpless, because you're suddenly made aware of all of this terrible stuff going on that inevitably you can really do nothing about? You can be informed, but I often used to think, in the old days, in the early days of InfoWars and things like that, or listen to Paul Joseph Watson or David Icke or whoever, that you do sort of end up feeling, oh, it's all hopeless and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think, and that's probably why these guys get tagged with the fear-mongering issue, because I see it, I get it, and I totally understand why people feel that way. And that's actually one of the reasons that I came away from the negative part of alien research, we'll call it. And I say alien, I'm using that term pretty loosely because we don't know. The truth is we don't know what we're dealing with. We're just using again, going back to the cryptid research, we're just throwing terminology about here. And I am one of those guys that I think if you look at the hard veteran researchers in ufology, and if you take a good serious look at what's unfolded in the last, I'd say, 60 or 70 years, you could say, and you probably should say, that a soft disclosure has happened within industry, within science, within aerospace. People like Ben Rich, who was the CEO at Skunkworks and that sort of thing, would drip feed into public consciousness about, the existence of ETs. And you hear about this all the time in science as well. And you'll hear, you'll hear all the science terminology being thrown about in all of these circles. I think it's a strange one, really, Andy, because we get accused of not using the scientific method, don't we? A lot in in all of this supernatural research. But yet, when you throw things like the human eye sees, I don't know, 1.5% of visible light, for example. When you throw that into an argument, we're not even talking about. So what you're saying? So there's nothing else in that 98.5%. Is that what you're telling me? No, we can't have a discussion like that. And that's what happens. There's no serious discussion going on about this sort of stuff. Again, I think you also learn, and I had to relearn, should I say, going into the cryptid research, because all that sort of water off a duck's back attitude, where you have to sort of brush this sort of negativity off, and this constant attempts to debunk.
Yeah.
You know, I was used to that in ufology, and I came into cryptid research.
It's a whole different level.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's no different, to be honest, mate. It is absolutely no different. It is just as volatile and just as...
Did you imagine there would be some sort of unanimity amongst the community, that people would be, yeah, you know what, you're researching this, I'm researching that, let's hook up and exchange some details and information and help each other out? Do you imagine I mean, there is some of that, of course, but did you imagine there would be more cooperation within the community?
Absolutely. I did a little bit, and I think, and the reason I thought that, and that's not necessarily untrue, really, when you think about your circle of friends and your circle of researchers that you trust, shall we say, and converse with. I think every area of the paranormal or the supernatural has its bad apples, should we say.
Mm-hmm.
And as ever, there's the financial aspect of this, the money making part of this, because again, it's from America, it has turned into sort of a business.
Yeah,
and a lot of people scoff at that, and a lot of people really don't like that. I think
especially in the UK. Yeah, especially in the UK, it's really frowned upon that you should make money from anything that you're spending, 98% of all of your time and money doing. The fact that you should get some sort of return from that is incalculable. It's unbelievable how money grabbing you could be. 2 years in to filming your documentary, Elusive, for example, which we should talk about. I think it's a wonderful documentary. 2 years you filmed that for. You traveled around the country, tackled that taboo subject we're talking about in the UK, the British Bigfoot, and why should you get any return on it, right? You put the video out. Why should people have to pay for that?
I know,
That thing that you produced and put together? Why should it cost anything? Well, I've got Prime. Why can't I just stream it unlimited? That kind of thing. Or it's a different world we live in. Obviously, you've got a lot more media experience than me, especially in film. But the desire to have constant content for free, because that's essentially what happens in all sort of schools everywhere these days, is so strong. I think one, with the Americans perhaps especially, it encourages people to make more of the evidence they have than they should do, or to over-interpret, signs and different things that they have, because they've got a podcast, or they've got a page that people are donating to, with a GoFundMe or a Patreon or whatever. You want content every day, all week long. I think it's although it's great that it brings lots of attention to the genre, it's damaging as well, because obviously unscrupulous people see opportunities and they'll take them. Let's just talk about Elusive, actually. Now, 2 years you're traveling around the country. Clearly, you met a lot of people along the journey. Tell us about some of the people you met, and your opinions of the things they told you about the British Bigfoot. What kind of evidence did you discover?
Well, I think what I would say, I probably should start off by saying that in the ufology research, I did interview a few witnesses that were, let's say, disingenuous. So, and actually, the one of the first people that I interviewed for Elusive, I very quickly found was sort of attention seeking, without getting too deep into that, and had to be sort of just cut from the project. And that, again, my naivety showed coming into that sort of cryptid research, because I really, really wasn't expecting that at all. So I guess I didn't really get off on the right foot, really. I was sort of on the back foot from the very start. So, I was a little apprehensive, but with any of this research, you just have to knock on doors, and you just have to be feet on the ground these days. And it's not enough to be conversing over the internet with witnesses sometimes, particularly when you're relying on them really, because there's a lot of pressure as a filmmaker. If I was to put someone that turns out to be disingenuous and a hoaxer, for example, into a film with 7 other who I consider, really valid, credible witnesses, that potentially could be very damaging to everybody involved in that project. So yeah, I had to be very cautious, but fortunately, the next person I met was Deborah Hatswell, who had her experience 35 years ago, ironically very close to where I live. So it seemed like a logical step to go meet Deborah, and I didn't know at that time the amount of research that Deborah had been doing in that 35 years. She had been, real old school veteran techniques of pins in boards and pins on maps and, notepads filled, you name it, everything.
Newspaper clippings and archives and the lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Really old school, I guess you could call it hardcore research, I would say. Very similar to a guy also involved with Elusive, Paul Sinclair. And it's being around these people that you can't, their enthusiasm really, it sort of rubs off on you. You really, and I guess that's what happened. I met Deborah, we did that. It's such an amazing interview as a filmmaker. It's an amazing interview. But during that interview, it's very powerful. A lot of people, if you've not seen that interview, there is a snippet of that on YouTube. If you can't afford to watch Elusive on Vimeo, then go onto my YouTube channel and you can see a portion of that interview with Deborah Hatswell where she's reliving her experience of when she saw what we've dubbed the British wild man, and it's quite heartbreaking. But at that time, the hairs on my arms was standing up, and I walked out of that house that day, and I knew that one, it wasn't going to be a 3-month project, because the amount of information that Deborah had, I knew there was just no way that I could do a quick fix on this. I had done the same with the reptilian film. I should again naivety coming into it, where a quick project, I'll turn this around, because from a financial standpoint, I can't afford it to be another year. No, so I ended up making it over 2 years, just because there's just so much ground to cover. There's so many witnesses, and as the film went on, more and more witnesses came out of the woodwork, which was I think after speaking to Deborah, that was sort of our intention, really.
Yeah.
We knew, or I knew as a filmmaker, that very much like the reptilian subject, which is now growing very, very fast, the interest in that sort of research now has gone through the roof. And I'm hoping for a similar thing about cryptid research here in the UK. And it seems to be heading that way. Yes, we are getting negative elements creeping into it, as when anything gets sort of popular, that sort of thing happens. But the witnesses and the people involved in this film, yourself included, I think it's really, I've said it before, it's sort of really the first film that I've been really proud of, in a way. Proud of the fact that I feel that I've done the people involved justice. I haven't sort of spun it any particular way. I've let it just run its course. I haven't sensationalized it. There are many pieces of, there are many pieces of evidence. There are things that I could have included that I didn't. There are things that I wanted to include, but I couldn't. And that's the other hard part of being a filmmaker, when somebody shows you a photograph that you are pretty much certain is a genuine photograph of a wild man or a Bigfoot, but they won't let you use it in the production. And that's heartbreaking as a filmmaker. The whole objective here is to. Ironically.
Why did you show me this?
It's strange though, isn't it? Because when you ask the audience after they've watched any film about aliens or cryptids or ghosts or anything supernatural, and 99% of the time, they know going into that they're very unlikely to be convinced one way or another. They're very unlikely to see anything groundbreaking However, we still have that desire to really watch these films unfold and watch this, particularly with Elusive, because it's. I don't think I really necessarily put the 2-year journey across as I could. I mean, the film would have ended up being 3 hours if I'd have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for my liking, the film's a little bit long anyway, as a film from a filmmaker's perspective. But I think overall, the feedback that I've received, and I get emails of people saying, no, I really enjoyed it because I wasn't expecting to enjoy it. Even from people who, I won't say any names, but there are people that I thought would hate it that have emailed me and said, do you know what? It was all right. Good. And I don't know what spin they expected me to put. I think that's what perhaps some of my early debates in the research, maybe 2 years ago, I got into some, as you probably did.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of opposition, I think, in the British research community to this animal actually being present here at all. And in the early days, you had to deal, as I have, with some of the objections to that. What I'd be interested in actually is what were some of the most common objections that you had to deal with about there being a British Bigfoot when you were making this film, and what evidence convinced you that it really might be here?
I think the evidence that convinced me that it might be here is probably based around the witnesses and the amount of witnesses. Mm-hmm. The correlations within the witness statements, the credibility, I'd say the broad range of witnesses, from housewives to children to military personnel, to doctors. It really spans a board, really. In terms of physical evidence, and that's a hard one, isn't it? That is really where the debate starts, for a lot of debunkers and a lot of skeptics. And I'm totally on board with the skeptics. I totally understand.
They're important.
Absolutely. It is absolutely vital, because if they weren't around, I don't know where we would be in this subject. Oh gosh. I dread to think.
Bigfoot would be pulling up into the center of town on the back of a UFO, and jumping off on his unicorn steed. I think it could go that far, because I always said that this area of research, and this is why I think it quite clearly connects to the fact you did something about reptilians and ufology, and then something about Bigfoot. And the next thing you did recently, which we'll get on to, is that it's a multi-denominational school of thinking. And there is you might think sometimes that some of these in the same denomination as you, because they've mentioned Bigfoot. You soon find out that they're not. So it's like me saying, "Oh, you're a Christian. I'm a Christian. Where do you go to church?" And they say, "I go to the Catholic Diocese of blah." I say, "Oh, I'm a Baptist." We already know that we're incredibly different from that very first opening sentence. That we're not interested in the same thing at all. Actually, it just has the same name. And I think it's the same in this community. You find sometimes you find very good friends that think very differently to you. But when people have a fixed world view that affects everything that they look at, I can be guilty of that too. Then it's it's hard to find common ground. Talking about stuff like that, I thought we should mention the sticks and stones. There seems to be a large amount of stick structure here in the UK and worldwide. And actually, if you looked at a lot of the Bigfoot pages, you could be, and didn't look at the title Bigfoot, you could be convinced that we were just some sort of wood enthusiasts. And by wood, I mean sticks, not woods or forest. That just like, funny sticklings and things like that. Why do you think people are so convinced that they're evidence of Bigfoot and not just bushcraft or forestry works and tree falls, etc.?
Yeah, well, I think people listening to this who know me are probably rolling their eyes now, because they know what I think of the stick structures, and I think it's probably the weakest form of evidence that we've got in relation to the Sasquatch and Canada and North America. Those places and the structures, they're vast. They're absolutely vast, and I think we'll touch on that in a minute. But the stick structures sometimes get compared almost like these things are identical, and they're really not. And that's my understanding of it. And there are people out there, we don't all have to agree on this.
Yeah.
I certainly think there are similarities. I will say that. And I certainly think that it is worth looking into. But whoever starts to look into it, I think Michael Appleby is one of the guys from the British Bigfoot that's looking into that. That is a big job, and a very, in my opinion, a very difficult job, because you don't have that wilderness here. Yes, I've had this debate with many people that Britain isn't as small as it's depicted. You know, it's small in comparison to the massive places like Russia and America, China, and of course. But our problem is that a lot of the researchers and armchair and part-time researchers, and myself included, very early doors, were not getting into remote places in Britain. You know, I think a British person's idea of somewhere remote is, I don't know, a mile from anywhere. You know, if that makes sense. And we've talked before about this.
30 minutes from Starbucks, end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and very similar to walking. For example, you'll get a sighting in a particular wood that someone's frequented for the last 30 years walking the dog. This guy's been walking the path. You know, he's been walking the cobbles through the wood. He hasn't gone off those cobbles in 30 years, but yet he knows that wood like the back of his hand. And this is the sort of mentality that you get in him. However, I do understand when Americans talk about our structures over here and say, well, that's probably somebody camping, because for the most part, and probably 99% of the time, it is someone camping, or it's deadfall, or it's wind damage, or it's, you know, just dead trees dying. It's, you know, we're coming into winter. You know, it's marshland. It's very wet. You know, the tree fell over.